We're all aging, and it's one of life's greatest privileges. But how do we turn the table on aging so it's not something to fear, but it's actually an opportunity to embrace? What if aging meant extending the quality of our life and learning to sit comfortably in our older selves as naturally as we once did in our youth? I'm Jacinta Parsons, and brought to you by Uniting AgeWell, this is The Aging Ideal. Through honest and inspiring conversations, we'll cut through the noise to find out what it really means to grow older well. Do you think we talk enough about death?
I definitely don't think we talk enough about death. Family don't want to talk about it. They don't want to face it. No one wants to say, when are you going to die or what are you going to do? So,
I think a lot about it, but I don't think we ever talk about it because people go, bleh. I mean, I said to my son the other day, if I only live till 70, I've just got 3 years to go. And he said, Mum, don't talk like that. So I'd say, no, we don't talk enough about dying.
We're alive until we're not. So if you want people to live that life to the full, how they can, right till the end.
If there's one thing chronic illness has taught me, it's that there is no better time to discuss death than now. But we are a society that avoids the conversation at all costs. And the cost of that avoidance is not having a say in how we might like our final years to be lived. In this episode, we're going to find out just what palliative care really is. We're going to speak to experts on how we support each other to talk about our end-of-life plans and ask the hard questions about the preparations we can make for those final moments of life. Professor David Currow is a world-leading voice in palliative and supportive care. His life's work has been devoted to understanding how life is lived when its limits begin to show and how we can better care for people when time, comfort and dignity matter most. Hello to you, Professor.
I would have thought David would be just great.
I'm glad we've got through our formalities, David. Let's do it. How would you define good palliative or end-of-life care? We use that word good quite frequently in this space, but obviously my good and your good might be very different.
They might be incredibly different, and in fact, I don't use the word good. I avoid it in this particular setting. I like to think of dying and death as being congruent with that person's life. And we all live incredibly different lives. We've had different experiences, different stressors, and we die as we live. People don't suddenly change because they've been told they have a life-limiting illness. In fact, far from it, people become more themselves. And to take a phrase from T.S. Eliot, people no longer prepare a face to meet the faces. The filters go and we become more ourselves. So I like to think that as a community and as professionals, we can support people to have a death that is congruent with their life.
Has something surprised you about that family and patient experience of serious illness?
As a community, we've got a real challenge. Our exposure to death is far less than it was a generation ago, and certainly far, far less than 3 generations ago. So for many of us, we don't have a blueprint. We don't have a template as to how this works. And that's a real challenge. If our only exposure to death is through the media, then we're going to get a very distorted view. With that as the context, we as clinicians, we as social support services, and as a community need to think about how we help people to understand what dying looks like, particularly expected death, and how we support people through that.
So how do we do this? You know, the word is not good. How do we do this in a way that avails people choice, while families and clinicians are balancing comfort, dignity, and that medical intervention that is sometimes required at end of life?
So for this, we need to be really clear about our goals of care. What's important to this person? And at times we can get stuck in the minutiae, what's happening to this person's blood sugar since yesterday. Part of this is taking that step back and really saying, at the moment, what's the big picture for this person, as well as the detail of the day-to-day? For that, we've got lots of signposts. How's this person's overall function? How are their energy levels? What's happening to their weight? What's happening to the underlying disease and indeed to the comorbidities that they may bring to this part of their life? As we take that big picture view together with detailed discussions about goals of care, we really can map a personalised way forward.
But what changes do you think we need or even improvements in the way that the system, the health system, supports people who are dying or with life-limiting illness?
I think we've got to get rid of some myths. There's this wonderful myth that everyone wants to die at home. We need to be really honest. As a report that was prepared for the Commonwealth 20 years ago was titled, "This is the hardest thing I've ever done."
And was that in reference to dying at home was one of the hardest things?
Well, in fact, it was in reference to people caring for someone dying at home. And, we need to be very realistic about what that entails. If you've got a large family who can drop everything, amazing things can be achieved. If you've got no one living under the same roof, the ability to do that is going to be limited. But much more importantly than that, I want to reflect on the fact that if your spouse, for example, is dying, let's look at a couple of the realities of this. Firstly, if you're the sole carer, you're the nurse, laundry person, cook, chauffeur, pharmacist.
Psychologist.
And you've got no time to be friend, lover or confidant.
Right.
So sometimes being in an inpatient unit frees you up to be those things in a way that's really difficult at home. And so as a community, we need to shift away from the 8-second soundbite, everyone wants to die at home, to actually understanding the majority of people want to spend as much time at home as possible, but where they want to be for the moment of death is far more variable and will often include an inpatient setting somewhere.
What have you personally learnt about life from working as closely with people at the end of theirs?
I've been incredibly fortunate that every so often, and it's far rarer than perhaps we think, that people have shared with me their summation of life, their peroration, as it were. And that's an incredibly special and privileged place to be. Importantly, what I hear in those special conversations, that as you face your mortality, the most important thing is your relationship to family and friends. It's about people. To be honest, we don't learn enough from people who are facing a life-limiting illness because their message is so consistent and so strong. Spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, and really enjoy the company and the camaraderie that they offer. There's nothing more important in all the world.
Kathy is currently supporting her much-loved mother through end of life with care. With presence and intention, Kathy is really hoping to create meaningful moments and memories along the way. Kathy, what's inspired you to get hands-on and have a really intentional approach to supporting your mum at the end of life?
I probably resented the beginning of the journey, and then I had to make a conscious decision. I either choose this or I don't. Like, it has to be a personal choice. I think then once I realised, actually, I do choose this and I do want this to be a part of the way I would support my parents, it definitely shifted things kind of moving forward. And I would say there's so many rewards once you come with that posture. So for me, there's been just a real richness, I think, being connected to my older generation in my family, not being disconnected. I think anyone who's thinking or considering it, I think just to take the time to also weigh up the cost, but also count, what the potential blessings will be. There is definitely both sides of it.
Do you see the positive impact the care you are providing has on your mum?
So I think proximity is a huge thing at this end of life. I think so often we pull away from it and we shy away from it. But I think if we can draw near to it and be present, I think it makes a world of difference. And I know You've probably heard the term the dignity of risk in spaces for older people. And I've had to come to realise that so often what they want could be very different than what we want for them. And we really do have to accept that what they want has to be okay, because at the end of the day, it is their life to manage ultimately. And so there's definitely been times where I've had to just almost take that back seat in the conversation and realise, okay, I'm really just here to facilitate what you want, not have the outcome of what I would prefer. So that's definitely a big one, I think.
I feel like I'm starting to get a sense of the support families actually really need. To explore this further, we're speaking with Esther McMillan Drendel. She's the former manager at the Victorian Palliative Care Advice Service, but now she's the operations manager in palliative care services at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne. Even the word palliative care can strike fear amongst us all, but I think we have a broad misunderstanding of the extent and the importance of palliative care. Do you want to tell us what it actually is?
Absolutely. And I think, it's the great thing at a dinner party when people say, oh, so what do you do? And you either say palliative care and people's faces fall, or they're like, oh, you must be an angel. Now, I can tell you my partner will probably disagree on that front. But in terms of palliative care and what we do, it's about actually looking after someone who's living with a life-limiting illness. Now, that's anyone from any age at any stage across all sections of life. And it's about improving that quality of life. So for some people, yes, we are pure symptomologists. We go in and we relieve pain or nausea or sleeplessness. But actually it's wrapping around that whole person, holistic care, spiritual care, and actually listening to what their desires are, what they want for best quality of life, and how we can best support that. So really 99% of our toolkit is actually around listening and communicating to our patients and their families and really supporting that, because palliative care is really the last taboo of our society. And people are just so reluctant to talk about it, which is really quite a sad thing, because we have birth plans for women having babies, and anyone who's gone through childbirth, everyone will straight away tell you their worst childbirth story. And the same kind of thing happens with palliative care, and people are so frightened of it. And the word palliative has so many connotations that it's just end-of-life care, when actually it's not. And so what we're really trying to do is change that story, that it's actually not just about end-of-life care. It's about living life really well while we've got a life-limiting illness.
That message is so important, because often we're not thinking about living when we're thinking about dying. So when you're working with patients primarily, but also, of course, the family, because they're pretty inextricably connected often, what's the important role that you play, or what are some of the complexities that come up in your work when it comes to that understanding?
A lot of people obviously have that fear. And so often people will go through hospitals, wards, and have lots of meetings with lots of different clinicians, and no one ever mentions palliative care, or they skirt around it and they use, alternative phrases for what it actually is. Like, you're not recovering like we would have liked to have seen, or have you thought about other options?
You don't want to be the person that also gives the information that says, we're concerned about the trajectory of your recovery.
It's really important that us as a cohort of clinicians actually talking about palliative care is that it's not doesn't mean you're imminently dying. It means that, yes, you do have a life-limiting illness, and that's any illness that's going to shorten your life. But it doesn't mean that life stops. And if anything, it's, you kind of get this information, and once kind of figure out how that sits with you and the people around you, then you can start planning about what you want to do with the rest of your life. I think of patients who have received these diagnoses, and then they go away and they come back and like, you know what? We're actually going to take that trip around Australia. We're actually going to go and see those friends and members that we've said we've always going to go and do and we've never done. We're going to spend those moments to really create memories. And sometimes this is years that they will live for, and other times it's days or weeks.
What are some of the other myths that we carry around palliative care that we really need to address?
That we use medications that either hasten or prolong death. That's not the case. And obviously we do use some of those top shelf medications in the form of morphine, and that in itself has frightening context for some people, because they think of it being as addictive, or they think that we're actually going to, to end someone's life when that's not what we're doing at all. Instead, we're keeping people comfortable. But also then, for families, that sometimes they feel a hesitancy, particularly if there's someone elderly, if they're in a nursing home, that they want to bring up palliative care, but they feel that they actually might be judged as actually wanting to, ending mum and dad's life sooner than what that would have been anticipated.
But surely there's also some very consistent experiences that show us how we really need to be working as a family. Particularly, I wouldn't mind hearing from you some of those aspects of support that often families will need with palliative care.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is obviously reaching out for help. That's a really big thing, and we get a lot of people going, I can do this, and they absolutely can, without a doubt. But the important thing is when you're caring for someone is that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and this is about reaching out and putting supports in place really early. We find then that people have that space. They have that space to not just be the carer, but also be whatever their relationship was to that person, whether it's a husband, a wife, mother, son, what have you. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people take on this role, and that's amazing. Without carers in this country, we wouldn't have a healthcare system. It would be completely overrun, and they really are a silent workforce that really need to be celebrated and assisted any way they can, because the care they can provide to people it far surpasses what we can do in a healthcare system, as it should. And, this is really important for them too, as part of their grieving process, that they can provide that care. So reaching out, having conversations, and I think, communication, it's something that is spoken about no matter what walk of life you're in, but people having a really clear understanding of expectations versus reality, what could happen, what may not happen, where they currently sit in this is just so important, because, coming in and saying to someone, you've been diagnosed with this and this is what's going to happen to you, they might not be sitting there in that space. They could be actually sitting, thinking, actually, mum or dad's going to get well again. And you've just come in and dropped an atomic bomb on them, and they just think, whoa, hang on, no one's told me anything about this. They could have had micro cues throughout, but we know people are under a lot of stress.
Being a human is a life-limiting illness.
It absolutely is. No one's getting out alive.
No. When is the right time to actually put pen to paper and make it clear on how we want the end of our life to look? Because life is changing all the time.
We have life events happen. There's divorces, there's relationship breakdowns, you're partnering. Some people find new religion, and values are constantly evolving. And what we want as we get older constantly evolves, and what the needs are of what we are when we're 20 are very different to the needs of what we are when we're 60 and 80. If we did a, kind of a stock take of who's got a will, who's got advanced care directive, a lot of people don't, because we don't want to think about that. We're great at planning, birthday parties and weddings and big fiestas, but we're not great at planning what happens at the end of our life.
Because it's so unknown, isn't it, though? Because we know when the wedding's going to happen. So we've got, okay, I'll do that. I think that aspect of, I guess we all hope for something, a long life or something easy or whatever we do, that's why perhaps we're not rushing in to kind of put stuff in place for what we don't know.
That is detrimental to our own needs, because that's all really good and well that I might think, you know what, at the end of the day, when on my coffin, I don't want gerbras. I've got a real dislike for gerbras. But how would anyone know that unless I've communicated? And that might be small for someone else, but actually quite significant for me.
So for those who are listening, that this is hard, this first step in to acknowledge perhaps what is happening in life and what's happening to ourselves and to our families, it's a step. How do we make that first one? I mean, the hotline is an incredible service. Is that often maybe the first little call that you might make to actually see, or is it going to your doctor?
There's a couple of ways you can go about this. So obviously, path is relatively easy if you have already got a diagnosis. So if there is already a known diagnosis of someone with a life-limiting illness, now that can be malignant, such as a cancer, or it can be non-malignant. So it could be some sort of organ failure, it could be dementia, it could be a neurodegenerative disorder such as motor neurone disease. It could be, anything that your doctor or a clinician has told you that is going to shorten your life, no matter the age. Then you reach out to your GP. You don't have to be committing to anything. It's just reaching out to someone, having a conversation. And I think the really good thing about having places like the advice service and Cancer Council is that you can have a conversation with clinicians and they can kind of guide you. They could say, actually, yes, now's the appropriate time to be going to your GP, to go see your solicitor, get your affairs in order. Start planning, get a referral to a palliative care service. But for the most part, actually, sometimes it might be, actually, you know what, it's too early. You don't need palliative care just yet. And because people can live quite well and function very well, even though they've got these diagnoses.
Wherever you are in this country, there is support for you to go and access.
There is, yeah.
And it's about reaching out.
It is.
Do you think we talk about death enough in our society?
Certainly the culture that I am in, my Greekness, we do death really well, really well.
I think it's much easier for those left behind if people make their intentions clear.
We don't even use the word death or dying. We tend to say passed away or they've gone.
So you've done a lot of your own thinking around your own death.
Well, you're confronted when you have an illness that you have to think, oh, well, where will this go? And what do I want to do?
But I have just bought the Bottom Drawer book. I don't know if you've heard of that. And that is about preparing yourself to die.
Having thought about it a lot, I started to plan my own funeral. I've even got one file on my computer that's actually got the songs that I want. And, I just think those sort of things, if I was to go tomorrow, somebody could look and go, oh, that's what she wanted.
Dina Symington is a Melbourne-based death doula and guide through life's final chapter. Dina has spent years walking alongside people and their loved ones as they face mortality, helping them approach it with a presence, a compassion, and an intention. She knows how hard it can be to talk about death and really is working to change that. Firstly, I look at a woman like you, Dina, and I think, how did you get into that work?
I didn't wake up one day and magically think, this is what I want to do. It was a slow evolution, but it was really brought upon after the death of my father in 2013. He had lung cancer, and it just was a slow evolution from there where it kind of forced me to have a dark night of the soul, if you will. I went through a very big grief process. Death became one of those things that wasn't just going to happen someday. It became more real because it had just happened to my father. So it was like, wow, actually, this body is finite. And that was a very much a living truth as opposed to something that was abstract.
It's quite incredible when that concept isn't abstract anymore. It becomes sort of a concrete realization. I'm interested to know the experience that you had with his death. Mm-hmm. How much did that inform the experience of your grief? And potentially then, I guess, leading on to how important it is as we experience our own deaths and the deaths of the people that we love. How does that inform the way we grieve after?
I had a really challenging relationship with my father. We were immigrants to America, and so he had a really tough life. And when he died, it forced me into a really, really deep grief, a deep place within myself that I hadn't really touched or known. And it was just so interesting to see the response of my coworkers, the response of the people around me, like they couldn't hold the grief at all.
I think we hear that still so much, don't we?
Yeah. But it was like such a real experience for me. And I think I remember one time, maybe it was Father's Day, and that was just maybe a couple of months after he had died. And my boss said to me something like, why don't you smile? Why aren't you smiling more? And I was just like, I can't shut this off. It's not something that you can turn on and off. And I think at that time, I didn't really know. I didn't have the language to really describe my experience or stand up even for myself in that way. I think in retrospect, I can look back and say, wow, if I just had someone to talk to or had a community or space to talk about death and grief that was normal and not clinical, that it would have made it such an easier experience for me in that time in my life to have that support.
It's interesting that you mentioned that clinical aspect of it as well. I guess that's part of where the birth doula comes in, is to kind of bring it back in outside of the medical setting and be part of, I suppose, the extent of the human's experience having it. Is that the same then for the death doula? Is it about what exactly? What are you doing in your role?
Overall, what we provide in our space, and that is to provide non-medical emotional support to those who are dying, affected by death, or are grieving or affected by grief. That can really range, but ultimately what I feel and what I've seen even in my other friends and colleagues who are doulas is that sometimes the care and support that people need, it's not something that can be so easily defined or written out as like, this is our job description. A lot of times it's just in the presence and in the being that allows us to care for and support people in a way that is really needed in that really vulnerable time.
I've heard, this term before, a good death.
Yes.
Does that exist? And I guess what you're going to say as well, though, is that it's so individual what that might look like. But what constitutes a good death?
I think for a lot of people, yes, there is absolutely such thing as a good death. And I think a lot of it constitutes with people dying with a sense of dignity. I think that's definitely
What does that mean? We say that, but what is it exactly?
We can't control when we die. Death is certainly going to happen, but it's very much uncertain outside of that. So I think where people feel empowered in their death, if they're in a situation where they don't die suddenly and, they can actually say to their loved ones or community, hey, these are my values and this is what's important to me. Maybe you might not be able to fulfill every single need, but, this is what I would like in an ideal situation, if possible. Obviously, that can't happen 100% of the time, but it's that piece of feeling supported and empowered in the support. And I think that gives people a sense of autonomy and also a sense of empowerment in a time which is, very vulnerable and very, just very sacred, actually.
Do you see that with people going through the dying experience that so much stuff will come up for them in those final weeks and months?
It can, for sure. I think to a degree, it's like, how much peace have you made with that?
Essentially, our lives are very much before us as we die.
Yeah.
You host a death cafe in Melbourne, but they actually run all over the world. Can you tell us what happens at a death cafe?
They're all run a little bit differently, but they have the same values. So, like, you show up, there's no expectation, there's no pressure. You can just listen. There's no agenda. And you just talk about whatever comes up naturally in the moment. Anything can come up.
And people can just roll in, not have to sort of say too much if they don't feel like it.
Totally.
They can just be there really safely, observing if they'd like, just to even get some sense of how everyone else is expressing an experience.
Yeah, and that can be really empowering for people too, just to listen. I always encourage people, just to be there in their hearing presence and listening presence, even if they don't feel like ready to talk in that moment. Everybody is so different that comes to the death cafes, so diverse, so many different ages, not just people who are terminal, not just old people, it's all ages. For example, I had a woman, probably in her 50s, come with her 16-year-old. It's incredible that people can come with their different religious beliefs or philosophical beliefs. They can actually sit in a space together where they're not sitting there trying to convince each other that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. And I think that's the real power of death cafes too, is that people can come together in that way just to reunite with that sense of not being separate from one another, just being human.
What I've learned from this episode is that there is so much to gain from simply talking about death. The conversation is so crucial to ensure that we shape our lives by the comfort, dignity and care that we all deserve in those final stages, and that conversation cannot wait until the end to happen. You've been listening to The Aging Ideal, a podcast brought to you by Uniting AgeWell. We hope that you've really enjoyed the stories, the perspective, and expert advice on the experience of aging. I'm looking forward to continuing this important conversation next episode.